Our first guest is Chiara Moenter, and she will introduce herself and tell you about her awesome SDG 18 project. So, Chiara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Torsten. And can I preface this by saying thank you for having me on? I think this is a really great format to just exchange some ideas because I'm definitely still super open to learn when it comes to space communication. There's so much to do. Yeah, I am here. I'm also part of Spacewatch Global as the event coordinator, but today I'm here to talk about my project SDG18 Space for All. And this idea came to me and three of my fellow students when we were highly focused on learning about the Sustainable Development Goals. And we came across the report from UNOSA, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, which was detailing how space technologies and services can contribute to each of the 17 SDGs. And it was quite some substantial contributions, but we realized space was not mentioned anywhere on this global agenda, and that didn't really make sense. And then we dug a bit deeper and we realized, like, oh, there's actually quite a lot happening in space, and also a lot that we need to consider. So, thus, the idea for an 18th SDG for space was born. And to kick it off, we decided to host a webinar, which was linked to the United Nations 75th anniversary. So it was a UN 75 dialogue where we invited some participants from the space sector, but also from sustainability consulting on to just talk about if this would be an idea, what they thought of it, and yeah, just get some input. And it was really overwhelming, actually. We had so many participants, and the consensus was yes, we need more focus on space sustainability. We need an 18th SDG for space. So that kind of kicked it all off. And we have the basic outline that our SDG and the topic of space sustainability covers a broad range of topics from political, economic to environmental. So political being looking at space laws, space treaties and principles, but also the military use of space and space surveillance, and then economic being the topics of asteroid mining, space tourism, and expansion of emerging markets, and environmental, of course, covering the topics of space debris and other environmental issues concerning space. So we're currently still working on gathering all these different segments that should be included in an SDG in order to create like the same target and indicator framework that the SDGs have. To that, it also needs to be said that the UN has mentioned that the SDG agenda is a closed one, but we're hoping that if we have a substantial package, we can get this on the next agenda coming 2030. And a really big aspect of this is also to bridge the gap and to create awareness for space and how valuable space can be. So to that, this really links to the topic of how to communicate about space. And this is something that's very dear to my heart as well, because I kind of always thought that space would be something that is not really obtainable for me because I do not have the capabilities to become an engineer. Sadly, my maths and physics are definitely not good enough. But then realizing that space holds so many more opportunities and is so vast. So it is really important to communicate this with people because a lot of people have the same misconception. So it is important to share that passion, but also to create those links of where space is around us and that we are part of it and not separated from space. But this, of course, also means that it is a bit difficult to know where to start. How do you start explaining space and where do you draw those connections and how do you make it tangible for someone who is not working in this field? And personally, I found that just coming in with a lot of passion and trying to find like those real life examples of where you cross paths with space already helps a great deal. But yeah, I'm interested to hear the questions and to have a bit of a talk. So thank you.
I should unmute myself. I should know that by now. So sorry for that. Um, as we want to hear all the fabulous and the fuck ups, what are the fabulous things that you encountered, or even what were the drawbacks?
I think the fabulous things were definitely the overwhelming responses of people saying like great initiative and wanting to get on board and providing us with a lot of input as well. I know that when we were starting to come up with certain targets, we got a lot from Mariba and some of his students that were sending in like, here we've developed these kind of targets. You can use this and jump on board. And
Are you talking about the super cool Moriba jar?
yes,
Wow.
the super cool Mariba jar.
Hey.
Yes. So that was a highlight. That was really fabulous. Yeah, and just personally, I just find this ongoing process of gaining more traction, more information, and getting more people on board is a really nice process to be a part of. But on the other hand, I mean, the drawbacks, of course, are also it's a huge task, and space is such a huge topic, so it is sometimes very difficult to contain that idea into something that is manageable and that is understood, and at the same time also trying to get all these other sectors on board as well. Like, I've had this conversation so many times where it is always like, yeah, but why are you focusing on space? We have issues here on Earth. These need to be tackled first. And it's not always easy to try to combat that and to explain that, yeah, but we cannot do that anymore. We cannot say Earth first and then space, because that's not how this works. But it's,
But
yeah,
what is your answer or to this? I mean, it's a very common thing that many of us are here. What is your answer? What was your answer?
well, I always like to preface it by saying like, well, we are part of space. This is not, it's not separate. We are on space already. So that's not a valid point.
Spaceship Earth.
Exactly. We're travelers on spaceship Earth. But then also to explain, like, because this is the other thing, like, nowhere in, like, for regular people, if they're not somewhat interested in space, you don't really hear a lot of what is going on. Most people have heard of Elon Musk and maybe the International Space Station, but you don't really get that input if you're not looking for it a lot of the time. So already just by diving in a bit to explain, like, okay, but do you know what is actually happening? And just the topic of space debris as well, to explain like there are already things happening in space and there are certain actions that we need to be aware of and that we need to combat. So we cannot say we're going to focus on problems on Earth first, because there are also problems in space that are already existing and that need to be dealt with soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So the floor is open to your questions, and I see Remco unmuted himself. So I hope that is a sign to ask a question. So over to you, Remco.
Sure, thank you. So thank you for your introduction, Chiara. And of course, I was aware of what you've been doing over the last, over a year now. But the SDG says space for all. And one of the things in communication that I find challenging in space communication is to reach outside of the space bubble. I mean, it's often space for the space bubble instead of space for all. How do you break through the walls of the space bubble and reaching people who do not understand what the space world is all about?
Mostly in my own sphere, by just telling everyone about space if they want to hear it or not. I also currently I'm doing a master's in space in sustainability science, and I just have now the habit of kind of relating all the sustainable development theories and the articles we're reading back to space, and just having these discussions with people. And it is often a question of accessibility. I mean, the space sector, once you're in there, is an amazing place to be, and I'm so happy that I've found my place in it. But getting to that point is sometimes, yeah, it's an active step you have to take, and it's not that easy for many people. So just by offering that accessibility and just by starting those conversations, and I mean, if someone's not interested, they're not interested, that's fine. But sometimes you actually notice that people do have quite a big interest and want to know more, but they just didn't really know where to look for it.
So how do you start with someone who is not necessarily interested? Because 90% of the people are not intrinsically interested in space. I mean, it's a faraway thing that's done by a very small group of people. How do you engage people who do not really understand space? How do you keep them interested? Because you're not an astronaut, so that's half the interest away straight away. I often get the question, I work in space. Oh, are you an astronaut? Well, no. Oh, okay. Well, that sounds boring then.
Yeah, but
But
often if
Chiara
you
has the
come in,
potential to become an astronaut, Remco.
yes.
Maybe
Well,
more
see
than
there,
we do,
Remco.
Torsten, but yes.
Indeed,
There are
indeed.
better reasons.
But no, honestly, if you just go into I found that just being quite excited helps a lot. And then coming in with like, hey, but have you heard of space sustainability? That already just gets people thinking. Because I mean, it's also it's a nice benefit that adding space to something makes it sound cool. So it's just space sustainability. It makes people think, and then usually you do have an entry point. And even if it is a discussion where they say like, no, I think we should focus on Earth first, or I don't really see the benefit of space, but then you at least have a ground for debate, which is already fantastic. They don't necessarily need to agree with me, but it's good to get into that conversation. So yeah, I just try to foster that conversation, but just bringing it in, and usually people are somewhat interested.
Okay. Well, that's a great bridge to what I'm going to talk about later. But you'll hear about. I'm glad you found a positive angle to my story about a very unsuccessful thing.
Give us 5 more minutes, Remco, because these are Chiara's moments. So
Thank you,
Chiara,
Artemis,
I was
would you-
actually wondering, if I may ask the question, Torsten, I was
Yeah.
actually wondering, Chiara, if there was one bit of, because as this is the topic today, of your basically journey of making this happen, because it's a great project. I agree, there should be a space SDG, and I think what you're working on is amazing. But I'm obviously really working on if there was, or curious if there was one situation in maybe your outreach, maybe outreach to experts, or maybe outreach in communication, or outreach to people that are not actually interested in space, where you said you could actually, in retrospect, have improved on that. And why? What would you have improved it? I'm not saying it would have been a fuck up, but maybe it would have something where you're like, that could have been better. And why? Because, as you know, we obviously learn a lot about things that don't go well as well, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I'm just thinking like I don't really have a concrete example in mind, but I definitely think that in terms of also how we were communicating it at the start, I believe we could have also been a bit more, I guess, strong minded in our communication. I think since we were a group of 4 students, we were also like a bit like, yeah, actually, well, we also don't have anything to do with space, but we think it might possibly be a good idea. And I think we should have just been more confident.
Stronger language.
Like, yeah, kind of like fake it till you make it, of like, we need this now, talk to us. Which might have helped to reach out to a few more people and get some more positive responses. Also in other sectors as well. I think it was also in terms of communicating with like UN departments for sustainable development. It was a bit difficult to find our footing at first because, yeah, we definitely did not appear to be experts, which limited the amount of responses we got.
I would like to give our Artemis the floor for her wonderful questions, to ask them directly. If you would like to unmute yourself.
Well, it's not so much questions. I mean, I've been in the business of selling space, because that's basically what you're doing, Chiara.
Yeah.
We're selling space, right? I've been in the business of selling space for 21 years, and I've learned something from the stuff that I sell besides space, which is emancipation for women all over the planet. That's just as intentional to most people as space is. So what I've learned is, indeed, enthusiasm is very important. You know, if you have this fire, then people will listen to the fire, because, you know, unless they think you're completely stupid or, you know, out of your mind, or should be, you know, locked up, they go like, why is this person so enthusiastic? So, you know, they'll give you some time. And the more, what I have found, the more you go to practical problems, like drought is a big problem on the planet. Hey? Water is getting more and more scarce in places where we really need it, because we're growing food there. Now, space, with all its wonderful satellites, the Sentinels, but also others, they will help common farmers to know where to give extra water and where not. And I think very few people that go into a supermarket, you know, and buy their tomatoes or their cauliflower or whatever they're buying in vegetables and also in fruits, have any idea that without space, the growing of food would be less successful, might be even, far too much hit and miss, which it has become less and less so. And, that's all, things that immediately pertain to your daily life. People like to eat. And so, in the moment you can, point that to them, and that there are cool apps that a common farmer uses. It's not like the farmer will have a, state-of-the-art laboratory to do this. It's the satellites that give it, and some people have, make some money because they manufacture an app for it. And there are more, fishing, same thing. And there's so many other things that we do because we can monitor it. Shipping lanes, there are gazillion things that we do better because we have these satellites and make life better, but also more environmental friendly because you can plan better, etc. So, that you can sell. Because what I've learned, the moment it touches their life directly, now we have their attention. True, I mean, I'm sending humans to Mars. That's a bit, less tangible for most people. But, although I do believe that if we have to grow stuff there, we have to be really smart, and what we learn there, we'll probably use here as well. But still, so, like I said, touch their lives directly. That's the simple truth.
Thank you very much. Some response, Chiara, because then we're heading over to Remco. And to all the others, feel free to open your camera. We want to see how you respond to what our guests are saying. So
yeah, just quickly before we go on, I think that's a really, really good point that you mentioned of definitely try to make, bring it close to home and connect it to people's lives, because that's how you really realize what an effect it also has on you. So thank you for bringing that in.
Great. Thank you very much, Chiara.